every Kendrick Lamar album ranked from least favorite to most favorite. This ranking is purely based on how much I enjoy each album. Damn, if you've already seen my most popular video on my channel right now, most overrated albums of all time, you already know that I don't like this album as much as many other people do. Even my favorite songs here have lost their flavor pretty quickly over the years. DNA and Humble will never give me the incredibly enjoyable and fun sensations they once did when they dropped. Nowadays, they're sort of an eye roll to listen to in my opinion. The only thing that really holds them up for me is the nostalgia factor. What Humble is to Kendrick is like what Creep is to Radiohead. Both of them are massive hits made by incredible musicians who have a mountain of far better songs in their catalogue. I also find the concept of this album to be pretty poorly executed, especially when you compare it to how incredibly layered and detailed the concepts within the previous to Pimp A Butterfly were. That 2015 album has so much detail and so many layers going on that no matter how many times I listen to it, I always discover something new about it that I haven't before, a characteristic that also applies to many of his other albums. But with Damn, that sense of discovery isn't really there for me. There are too many low points on the album for me to even care about noticing things I may have missed before. I mean, I remember there was a point in time when people were literally poking fun and making memes about Kendrick releasing a version of Damn with the tracklist reversed to reveal an entirely different concept, since the idea of it meaning something different when played backwards felt messy and confusing. There are certain times when I've been in the mood to listen to Section 80, Good Kid, M.A.A.d City, even Untitled Unmastered, but I can't recall the last time I've actually been in the mood to listen to Damn. If you take away the conceptual and serious tracks from each Kendrick album, then the songs that you're left with are still good songs. Backseat Freestyle may not be the mind-blowing intense experience that Sing About Me I'm Dying of Thirst is, but it's not trying to be. It's just a really fun banger that actually ties in well with the story that KDot is telling throughout the album. TV Off may not be as emotionally captivating as Reincarnated, but it's still an undeniably fun banger with a great victorious beat to it and an endless amount of catchy moments. But as for Damn, those more straightforward, non-conceptual, less serious songs, which I would say are Loyalty, Love, and I guess DNA too, completely pale in comparison to the conceptual highs that songs like Duckworth and Fuel are. If we look at the lyrics on Love, they look so amateurish and contain a bunch of filler lines that it genuinely blows my mind that the same man who wrote this also wrote The Blacker the Berry. Loyalty also has Kendrick throwing it in lyrically too. It's really on these tracks that it almost sounds like he's trying to appeal to the mainstream rather than creating an actually good song with artistic value. The instrumentals on these songs are pretty boring too. Love is minimal and dull, and even on one of my favorites on here, Elements, there aren't really that many interesting things going on in his beat. And then there's God, which might be my least favorite song out of all his studio albums due to how awful and laughable his singing sounds. Listen, there are still some amazing songs on here. Duckworth still stands as one of the greatest album closers in his discography. XXX is an amazing multi-phased song that is one of the few highlights here that I still enjoy as much as I did when I first listened to it, and that intro to Pride will never get old. But as a whole, this album easily contains his most inconsistent set of tracks in terms of quality and cohesion. Favorite tracks, I guess DNA, Elements, Fuel, Pride, XXX, Fear, Duckworth. Least favorite, God. GNX. I see GNX as the most mixtape-like album in his entire catalogue due to the fact that it's not presenting itself as the mind-blowing, massive, grand, and conceptual records that albums like T-Pab and GKMC are. It's easily the most straightforward Kendrick album, and what it is at the end of the day is a tight set of songs that are either fun bangers, hooky neo-soul cuts, or conceptual tracks, with nearly all of them having tons of replay value. It really has KDot giving a bit of everything. There's songs that are for the hip-hop fans, his own fans, and the mainstream, and it makes sense why this isn't a large conceptual record, given the fact that this was of course dropped after Kendrick won one of the biggest rap beefs of all time where he was up against Drake, and after his diss tracks completely eclipsed Drake's in terms of cultural impact and mainstream popularity, as well as him being rewarded with the opportunity to perform at a Super Bowl halftime show show, it only makes sense for Kendrick to drop some victory-like songs on an album whose instrumentals are all reminiscent of the biggest hit he released during the beef, Not Like Us. These Not Like Us type songs are TV Off, Squabble Up, and I guess Peekaboo as well, and also the title track in a way. The first two I mentioned are some of the most fun songs on the album, but on top of that, we also get a bit of other things within the fairly short runtime this record has, with the opening song serving as a wonderful tone setter as Kendrick catches the listener up on where he is at during the current state of his career and life. He thanks Nas for congratulating him on performing at the Super Bowl, while also expressing frustration over one of his biggest musical influences, Lil Wayne, having the complete opposite reaction and actually being disappointed that Kendrick was the one to perform at the Super Bowl. We also get the more neo-soul cuts, Luther and Gloria with SZA, both of which are amazing, but I especially adore Gloria due to its creative lyrical concept of Kendrick metaphorically comparing his relationship with writing songs to an actual relationship between two lovers. And given how deep into his career Kendrick has been at this point, the song The Heart Part 6 has him feeling nostalgic, reminiscing about where he first started and speaking in detail about the early days of TDE. Then Reincarnated is easily the most conceptual and intense song on the album, with a hungry, charged Kendrick rapping from the perspective of different classic musicians, describing their lives in a first-person perspective as if he were in their shoes, with the final mind-blowing verse having him play himself. All of this is performed over a Tupac beat, which makes sense as KDot is really channeling his Tupac influence more than ever before through his highly energized, almost angry sounding performance, to the point where he actually does sound like Tupac at certain points. So while I don't think GNX is his best album, I see people give this record less credit than it deserves for being as adventurous as it is. I feel like where this record really falls flat is through the Not Like Us type bangers that I mentioned earlier, because while Squabble Up and TV Off are fire, tracks like Peekaboo are way too weird for my own personal taste. It reminds me of those weird vocals he did on Baby Keem's Melodic Blue in a way, which I did like on that album, but as for this song, it's a little too much for me, and the title track here features an instrumental that is way too ridiculous for me to enjoy. Some part of me does appreciate how unhinged it is, but at the end of the day, it is sort of a novelty song and may even be one of my least favorites in his entire catalogue. And while I do like Dodger Blue, it could have definitely benefited if it were even longer, but still, with all that said, this is a great album and a pretty overhated one too, as I have seen too many people call this a bad album, which I don't find to be true at all. Yeah, there are some stinkers here, but there are also so many amazing moments that are so undeniably enjoyable. Favorite tracks: Whacked Out Murals, Squabble Up, Luther, Man at the Garden, Reincarnated, TV Off, Dodger Blue, Heart Part 6, and Gloria. Least favorite: GNX, Mr. Morale, and The Big Steppers. After an almost 5-year wait since 2017 Stam, the longest gap between two albums in Kendrick's solo discography, we were rewarded with the double album Mr. Morale and The Big Steppers, and given how disappointed I was by Damn, I was really happy that this record ended up being amazing, and I would say worth the wait. And while of course in this long span of time he didn't release any solo projects, he did embrace this unique experimentation with weird vocal inflections and voices through the multiple features he delivered on the album The Melodic Blue by his cousin Baby Keem. I'm sure many of you remember when the Top of the Morning meme was at its peak of popularity around the time that album came out, and while there isn't a moment on this album vocally that is as weird as his performances on The Melodic Blue, he still embraces some unique baby vocals at points, like on Silent Hill, almost sounding like Baby Keem. A few tracks before this had KDot saying baby in a weird, almost ASMR-like way on Purple Hearts, but this is really just one small aspect of a large double album, which showcases this record as arguably the most versatile in his entire catalogue, because while he gets bangers that are packed with irresistibly catchy flows like on N95, other songs have him revealing really personal topics about himself, his family, and his personal life more than ever before, like on Mother I Sober, possibly my favourite song on the album, where he details incredibly dark and seriously devastating experiences revolving around his mother's experience with abuse. The haunting darkness of these lyrics is emphasized further by Beth Gibbons' chilling chorus. There really couldn't be a more fitting vocalist for this song. I see this track as almost a yin and yang to Father Time, which appears on the first disc, where KDot talks about his relationship with his father. There's also Auntie Diaries, where KDot goes against the normalization of transphobia in hip-hop as he recounts the discrimination his transgender aunt experienced, while also expressing love for his aunt as well. We Cry Together is arguably the most emotionally intense song on the record and is reminiscent of Eminem's Kim, feeling more like witnessing a real-life scene than listening to an actual song, as it has KDot and actress Taylor Page playing a couple engaged in a very intense and angry argument. So there are tons of themes involving family issues, relationship issues, and personal issues. I've seen people describe this album as being like a therapy session, which I find to be a very accurate description given how vividly he expresses his mental health issues while continuously portraying himself as an imperfect person who has made many stupid mistakes. Even sonically, this is a pretty therapeutic album too, as even the harder hitting tracks features instrumentals that are more low-key and chill in comparison to the bangers on his other albums. Silent Hill is probably the best example of this. The production on this album has a lot of great variety and continuously brings out different moods from track to track, making it engaging from front to end for the most part, due to the vast range of instrumentals laced throughout the project. Not all of them are amazing though. I find the minimalism and lack of switch-ups and progression on Crown to be underwhelming, to the point where its 4.5 minute runtime feels even longer than it is. I also find Die Hard to be one of my least favorites because despite having an admittedly catchy tune, there's nothing about it lyrically that makes it anywhere near as captivating as many of the other tracks on the record. I could say this critique of a lack of captivating lyrics also applying to Count Me Out, but the constantly amazing beat switches, flow switches, and voice switches really make up for it. Kendrick is like a vocal chameleon on that song, and it really is one of the best tracks on here, production-wise. I should also mention m.A.A.d when throwing out compliments, as it really does display big improvements in his singing, especially when you compare it to his singing on tracks like God from his previous album. Overall, this album is a pretty big step up from Damn. I wouldn't say it has the same mind-blowing highs as an album like T-Pab, but it still offers a consistently great set of tracks with a solid amount of variety, making it once again worth the wait. Favorite tracks: United in Grief, N95, Worldwide Steppers, Father Time, Rich Spirit, We Cry Together, Count Me Out, Silent Hill, Savior, Auntie Diaries, Mr. Morale, Mother I Sober, and Mirror. Least favorite: Crown. Section 80. I did have some difficulty deciding whether I liked this album or Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers more, but ultimately I went with this one. I just find the concept of the album where KDot and other people are sitting around a campfire and telling each other stories to be very creative and executed in a pretty amazing way for a debut album. This concept also gave him the freedom to test how well he can tell a story through his songs, like on Keisha's song, which tells a devastating and dark story about the depressing lifestyle of a prostitute, a song that to this day stands as not only one of my favorite Kendrick songs ever, but also one of his most beautifully written songs in his catalogue. It's really the lyrics on this song where he proves himself to be more than just a rapper. He's a poet too, because the verses convey an incredibly powerful message that is told so well. I also feel like tracks like this on the album laid the stepping stones for the incredible storytelling songs that he would later be more comfortable making in future releases. This album is also such a massive step up from the overly dedicated mixtape, as Kendrick's rapping ability, his knack for creating good choruses, and his ear for good beats have all gotten so much better since the release of that tape. Rigor Mortis is especially a great display of the massive improvements his technical rapping abilities have gone through over the time period between this and Overly Dedicated. Funnily enough, he sounds more overly dedicated on Section 80 than on that mixtape. It's not that easy to describe how the production on this album sounds, as it doesn't really have its own distinct instrumental identity like his other albums do. You could say T-Pab fuses elements of jazz jazz and funk in his production. Damn leans more heavily into trap than all of his other records. But as for this one, you get a bit of everything from the horn-laced champion style beat on Rigor Mortis to the weird, almost electronic beat on Tammy's song that sounds underwater. There's even a live jazz instrumental in Absol's outro. The album is quite versatile instrumentally, but for the most part, many of the beats on Section 80 carry a chill, low-key atmosphere that even gets melancholic at points. I find the one on Keisha's song to be especially melancholic and fittingly gloomy. I do admit that there are some elements on this record that haven't aged all that well over the years. I don't think the guest chorus on No Makeup Her Vice fits in at all with the vibe that Kendrick creates. The chorus is sort of reminiscent of Linkin Park's classic stuff, which is a resemblance that makes no sense on a Kendrick song, and the beat on the earlier mentioned Tammy's song does sort of sound like a product of its past. But with that said, much of the instrumentation on this album is fantastic. High Power features one of my favorite beats that KDot ever rapped on. Produced by J. Cole, it's such a perfect embodiment of what being nostalgic feels like, intended or not. The pianos in the album opener are perfect for setting the tone for this record too. Favorite tracks: Fuck Your Ethnicity, Hole Up, ADHD, Ronald Reagan Era, Poor Man's Dreams, Keisha's Song, Rigor Mortis, Blow My High, High Power. Least favorite: No Makeup Her Vice. Good Kid, M.A.A.d City. Given that this is a pretty early Kendrick album in the grander scheme of things, since it is only his second studio album, it's pretty mind-blowing that it ended up being as incredible as it is. It feels like his popularity and status in the rap game, when you compare the time periods between when he dropped Section 80 and GKMC, is colossal, because Kendrick was only 2 albums deep into his career and he had already dropped what would quickly become widely regarded as not only one of the best albums in hip-hop history, but also one of the greatest concept albums of all time. To have only 2 albums to your name and already be brought up in the GOAT conversation is something that most rappers could only dream of achieving. There are multiple tracks on here that are some of the most essential when it comes to 2010s hip-hop. Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst is an incredible, mind-blowing 2-part track that carries evocative storytelling, massive emotional weight, beautiful beats, and persuasive, passionate rap performances throughout its 12-minute runtime. Lengthy runtimes like this are pretty uncommon in hip-hop, but this track completely justifies its length incredibly well. I would also go as far to say that it is one of the best songs in KDot's entire catalogue. And then there's M.A.A.d City, another 2-part track that is also timeless. It contains one of the most iconic beat switches in hip-hop, and Kendrick sounds so hungry in the insane first half of the song that it's impossible not to feel energized when you listen to it. You can tell that Kendrick was so dedicated and committed when it came to the creation process of this album, as the concept of this record clearly had more dedication put into its execution than Section 80. The idea of having these skits play into one track to the next works out really well and ties each track that a skit is featured on like a knot perfectly. I feel like the concept of this album is the easiest to understand and follow along to in this catalogue, as you are already transported into the first chapter of Kendrick's story on the first track all the way to the last track, which feels like a celebratory, curtain closing, credit rolling moment to a depressing film. The listening experience of this record really lives up to the text that's on the album cover, as it really does feel like the musical equivalent of a movie. Each track here feels like a scene. I can picture Backseat Freestyle having a young Kendrick freestyling in the car with his friends, having fun, while the very next scene has him being pressured into committing crimes with the same friends in The Art of Peer Pressure. The earlier mentioned Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst is the big emotional gut punch moments that the film was building up to this entire time, and Poetic Justice is the sex scene. The nostalgic emotions that the vibes of some of the instrumentals carry are really fitting, since this film also feels like Kendrick is reminiscing about his childhood. I am mainly referring to the one on Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, where the sample is so bittersweet and delightful. The piano sample in Sing About Me are also similarly bittersweet and delicate on the ears. There are very few things I would complain about on this album, since it really is a conceptual masterpiece of a record, but I guess I'm not too crazy about the way the album opens and starts. Shireen is a good intro to the story lyrically, but sonically speaking, I find his talking like flow to be boring, and the beat behind it isn't isn't captivating enough to make up for it. It's one I would only listen to within the context of listening to this album, but I would never listen to it on its own. I feel like this style of Kendrick's storytelling songs with a talking like flow worked out better on How Much a Dollar Cost, and for an album as iconic as this, Compton seems to be the song that everyone, including myself, often forgets about the most in comparison to the rest of the tracklist. I like how victorious it is. It's an uplifting homage to Compton itself, but I'm just not that into it, and I would have anticipated something so much better from a collaboration between Dr. Dre and Kendrick Lamar. But still, there are so many undeniably incredible moments all across this movie-like experience that will never get old. The second the beat to Money Trees plays, I immediately get serotonin, and then when the J-Rock verse starts, which is my favorite feature on the entire album, I've played it so many times that I know I should move myself to the edge of my seat every time I listen to it. I also find the chorus on this track to be one of the greatest that KDot has ever laid to tape. I love that short verse that follows the beat switch at the end of Swimming Pools, a hit song that deals with the dark side of alcoholism but disguises itself as a drinking club anthem. The chorus is so catchy that most people don't even realize the meaning behind the lyrics. I could really go all day talking about the amount of fantastic moments on this album. I'm not saying this is one of the best albums of all time or anything like that, even though I know many people feel that way. I think it's closer to being one of the best rap albums of the 2010s, but I still believe it deserves much of the praise that it receives. Groundbreaking concept, incredibly creative song concepts and ideas, and thought-provoking songwriting. Favorite tracks: Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, Backseat Freestyle, Money Trees, Poetic Justice, Good Kid, Mad City, Swimming Pools, Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst, and Real. Least favorite: Shireen. To Pimp A Butterfly. I know it's cliche to call this Kendrick's best, but it would just feel wrong not to put it here. Part of what made this album such a mind-blowing and sensational surprise when it dropped is that the production on this record was vastly different from anything Kendrick had done up until this point. While GKMC is of course an improvement over Section 80, the level of difference in the instrumentals between T-Pab and the previous GKMC compared to the difference between GKMC and Section 80 is a mindfuck moment. The first few minutes of the record alone already pull you into an experience that Kendrick Lamar has never created before, with an incredibly funky bassline from Thundercat and even vocals from legend George Clinton of Funkadelic fame, one of my favorite funk groups of all time. There are even some G-Funk influences in the instrumental and live jazzy horns. There is just so much detail in this one track, a level of detail and instrumental layering more ambitious than anything KDot has put together before. On T-Pab, you're not getting those atmospheric boom-bappy hip-hop beats that were commonly found on GKMC and Section 80, since T-Pab heavily incorporates jazz and funk elements into the mix, creating Kendrick's most forward-thinking and uniquely sounding album to this day. Not only is the production on this album groundbreaking, but so are the incredibly creative themes and song concepts it presents. For example, in the track that follows Wesley's Theory, we get a transition into For Free interlude, which almost feels like watching a theatrical play. Kendrick is simultaneously rapping and acting, with bizarre vocals and a chaotic live jazz beat in the background, but if you actually pay attention to what he's saying, the lyrics reveal an immense level of poetry, too well written for the song to simply be labeled an interlude. He delivers a piece that sounds silly on the surface, but contains unique metaphors speaking on capitalism. The woman he is speaking to throughout the song warns that she's going to get Uncle Sam onto him at the end of the track, which I interpret as a metaphor for the unfair consequences of overstepping boundaries in a system controlled by the American government. There's also These Rules, one of my favorite Kendrick songs of all time, where he takes advantage of his own success to plan revenge on an enemy by having intercourse with his girlfriend while the enemy is in jail. That's a very simplified description of the song though, as the verses Kendrick delivers on the track is eye-opening and brilliantly written. The song You that follows is one of my favorite hip-hop songs of all time, being an incredibly devastating first-person perspective of an extremely depressed Kendrick where he is pushing himself over the edge to the brink of ending his life. The swishing bottle in his hand, the lip smacking, the drinking, and a vocal performance where you can literally hear the tears through his cracking voice come together in a way that feels incredibly cinematic and powerful. role. So much so that I can't imagine any other rapper committing to a role like this the way Kendrick does. And it's a song that really pushes the boundaries of how important and powerful the impact of your performance can be on a song through voice and sound effects alone. The beat switch that this song goes through is also very creative and unique. I like how there's a sample glitching out going from the left to the right here before smoothly transitioning into the sorrowful jazz beat that plays after. He really could have reused that TV static sound effect as a beat switch like he did on m.A.A.d, but no, he was so precise and careful, taking care of each second on this album. To go over the concept of TPAB isn't as easy to do as it was for his other albums, because there are just so many layers and details going on that no matter how many times I listen to TPAB, there will always be something new to discover from it. There's a poem that builds up in the tracks, and once the full poem is disclosed in the album closer, Mortal Man, it is revealed that he is actually saying it to his idol Tupac in a fake interview that was constructed by grabbing snippets of actual Tupac's interviews and putting them together against Kendrick's voice, and it all comes together in a way that sounds so smooth and natural. This poem also reveals that there are tracks on this record that act as yin and yang to one another. The self-hatred earlier mentioned You and the self-loving confident I are the most obvious example of this. There are probably more things about this poem that I haven't even learned about yet, because this album is just that massive with layers and detail. It's to the point where this record is one of those very rare instances where an album just gets more and more exciting and mind-blowing the more times you listen to it. This album explores themes such as the exploitation that the music industry, especially music labels, puts onto young and upcoming musicians, as seen in songs like For Sale. There is also an exploration of racism in America in songs like All Right and The Blacker the Berry, as well as the eye-opening experience Kendrick goes through when reaching a point of success as someone who grew up poor in a rough neighborhood. In Mama, he visits the very place he grew up in and realizes how out of touch he has become, as he can no longer relate to the other kids in the neighborhood now that he is successful. Some of Kendrick's greatest performances and verses of all time also land on this album. I find the last verse on The Blacker the Berry to be especially flawless, as it really relies on the context of everything that came before it to fully understand what he's saying in the last verse. He calls himself the biggest hypocrite of 2015 in the first two verses, and in the very last lines of the song, he explains that the reason he's given himself that title is because he's criticizing people who commit violence against black people, even though he himself murdered a person blacker than him during his gangbanging days. And he just sounds so furious on the mic that it's impossible not to feel the powerful emotions he spills out through his voice on the track. It's a song that is as intense emotionally and sonically as it is lyrically. His ability to channel raw emotion through his vocals reaches a level of creativity and dedication on this album that I honestly doubt he'll ever surpass. It's to the point where some moments feel closer to a Grammy-winning acting performance than a traditional rapping one. TPAB is really an album you can't play in the background. You truly have to pay attention to the music and what he's saying to get the most out of the experience. If GKMC is a short film, then TPAB is a book. It's albums like To Pimp A Butterfly that truly showcase how far hip-hop can go in delivering powerful messages, conveying passion and emotion through the voice, and pushing the boundaries of creativity and ambition in its instrumentals and song concepts. It will be a long time before we see another album as thoroughly detailed and as carefully executed in its ideas as this one. Favorite tracks? All of them apart from How Much a Dollar Cost. Click here if you want to see how I would rank Kanye's albums. Please like and subscribe so I can hit 200 subscribers before the end of this month.